Mein Kampf, you refer to, has a very strange sentence, and Mr. Ravish Kumar will, endorse what I'm saying instantly. Mein Kampf, Hitler says, for a lie to be seen as truth, the scale of the lie must be mind-boggling. In times when propaganda has almost entirely replaced truth, a report of this nature is at least a small step in that direction. I invite Professor Narayani Gupta. She's contributed a wonderful essay on the nature of Delhi. But if she were to lecture on the nature of Delhi, you know, that itself will take several hours. But I invite her to make a brief statement on about this report. Thank you.
Since you mentioned Delhi, I thought I'd have a little postscript to something Zoya said about the Central Vista and the colonial mindset. If you go to the Central Vista, there is a board there giving directions, and the first inscription is Kartavya Path. The second is Connaught Place. Now, colonial. The point was, I can see what their problem was. If they didn't say Connaught Place, they'd have had to say Rajiv Chowk. Oh. Right. So it was one colonial against another. So ultimately. Thank you very much, Professor Devi. I had not even heard of this project till a month ago, and it's very good of you to have included me in this. So I'll say a few things which strike me as worth saying, I hope. I have been teaching history, unlike all of you who've been able to think about history, but not have to face large board classes who are sitting at the back, doing furtive things. So it's been a challenge. So to me, the most important thing about looking at our history is what percolates down. Because history is with you from school right up to class 10. After that, you can shed it. And some of them go on to do history in college. So it's the young people, thousands and millions of them, who are imbibing what is being given to them. And so I think the most important thing to look at is what has come down to the level of the textbook. Because all of you have been through the same thing, and some of you go on to become scholars, but that's a very small number. Reconstructing the past of a large inhabited area over the last 120 centuries is not easy. This is true for many parts of the world. There are books called The History of Europe, but these have gaps in terms of regions and time periods. It's a hop, skip, and jump exercise for a length of time, beginning in Greece and ending in Western Europe, just as Indian history begins in Sindh, spends a long time in the 19th century in Bengal, and then moves on to Delhi now. So civilization, being in the singular, is appropriate, but histories in the plural is imperative. And I won't dwell on this because Dr. Devi has explained it beautifully. I'm one of the Common or Garden historians who hold the string on which one can thread the pearls of wisdom from individuals like those who have spoken and will be speaking. But I call Eliot to my rescue. Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? In the pyramid, the handful of wise men are followed by dozens who do rigorous research, which accrues into knowledge. This in turn is abridged into information purveyed in hundreds of books. And from information, you have what is now becoming enormously popular, these little sets of data preparing you for what is called multiple choice questions. I would like you to try and answer some of these questions. Nobody would get through. I mean, things like on which edict of this edict of Asoka is inscribed on which pillar. Now, that kind of thing you have to learn. So where are you going to learn the history of India when you're clogging your mind with all this ridiculous information? And where students, isn't it an irony that a country which has been famed for its rigorous philosophies, its fearless questioning, its exhilarating sense of wonder, the Ishopanishad is in just a beginning, it has degenerated into this, where students are classified as winners and losers. There is no attempt to cultivate individual thinking. And for the purveyors, the only occasions when textbooks are taken out of the NCERT cupboards is when there is a charge of some group's sentiments being hurt. Every now and then somebody pops up and says their sentiments are hurt. And at once the NCERT pulls out the textbook and leaves out that sentence. It's safest to be like the dodo in Alice in Wonderland and give prizes to everyone, barring Muslims, of course. So, suppose we try to substitute interests for the so-called sentiments. Notice the expanding mind of a child. As riveting an exercise as listening to a wise man's arguments. The child's concentration swings between dreams of her future and the fascination of things in the present. The child should not be forced, along with her school uniform, into a uniform mind, parroting the idle slogans that are pulling our civilization down. Help her to avoid the word leader for people who do not lead, for personality for people who don't have any, and elite for simply people who speak in English, and instead to develop a sense of respect for all ages and stations of life. This project is concerned with the histories of India. Conservative ideologues are not the first to reduce this to the singular, to make it one history. It was done by the British historians in the early 19th century. They were possibly convinced, the rate at which things were going, that Maharaja Ranjit Singh's ironic sentence, "Sab lal ho jayega," was a prophecy, and that the whole map of India would be red, but it wasn't. Indians continue to see their country in regional terms. Remember, Bankim did not write Vande Mataram for India, he wrote it for Bengal. The numbers were fiddled later in the song to make it sound as they refer to the whole of India. If students were to study India in terms of regions, not the modern states, but regions based on geography, the unstated fears that this will set off vociferous tendencies will be proved wrong. This doesn't happen. It will create more of an interest. History scholars need to clarify not just the frontiers of knowledge, but the frontiers of ignorance. And it's important to say we do not know. If you leave out Karnataka for a spell, is it because there's no information or because you're not interested? Make that clear. And they're often, history scholars need to clarify this, frontiers of ignorance. Even today, I can visualize, I studied in school in the 1950s, so I can still visualize what the books painted in words. The chapter began with the sentence, "These tall, handsome, fair-skinned Aryans came over the high Himalayas to begin the history of India." To me, it's still a reality. You see these tall, fair Aryans coming in. So it's this kind of thing remains with the child. You don't say the sort of politically incorrect thing now, but there are other things which are becoming part of their kind of mindset. Geography has to be twinned with history because it is rivers, forests, and hills that make social formations and states. The anxious practice of always printing the modern boundaries of South Asia on maps relating to earlier periods is quite ridiculous. Luckily, this cartophobia, as I call it, that is fear of maps, which the government suffered from, has abated somewhat. And thanks go here to Mushirul Hassan, who, when he was in the archives, opened up the maps to everybody. It was a sea change, because until then, we were not allowed to look at maps. They were regarded as extremely dangerous. So, with the recent attention to climate change, it is imperative that crop patterns, floods, droughts should be given as much attention as political fortunes. Nobody talks about them. You hear about kings winning battles. You don't know why they lost or why they won. Geographical insight should connect the local to the regional and to the national. As the textbook moves along time, the student should also enjoy creating a timeline for her own family, town, and for the area. And this will give them insights into what propels migration. Remember, we were not the unchanging East, as the British called us. Indians were constantly on the move, and once the railways came in, goodness, they packed themselves into it and moved. So there's been a lot of movement within India, which I think is as important as movement overseas and so on, which also happened, which we are not giving enough attention to. It's not just a 20th century phenomenon. So this obviously implied a lot of give and take. One of my favorite stories is how on the Hajj pilgrimage, shiploads of people from Southeast Asia and all would go to Makkah. And there they used to group themselves not by country, but by profession. And many professionals learned from others on that long sea voyage. They learned, the carpenters sat with carpenters, learned their languages, understood, and were able to communicate. So we have a lot of give and take with places outside India, which children who now keep talking of emigrating to Canada or Australia should give, sort of acknowledge and realize that we have done this before also. Inserting physical movements of people will thus make us aware that this kind of movement has been happening. Discussing the exploitation of the earth and of agriculture and industry. Now, this is a little sore point with me. Should also include mining, because for some reason that never comes in. And when you hear of the Aravalli being absolutely sort of flattened, and because of mining, people should think about that. What we keep on doing is repeat the grievance about the Kohinoor diamond. Instead of that, if you look at the harsh extractive industries, the ruining of hills and riverbeds for construction, the obsession with shining stones for jewelry, I think this will give them new things to think about. Conservation has many more dimensions than those which are addressed at present. These will also help us understand how India, different parts of India, have different countries they relate to. They say that in Kerala, everybody is standing looking west. Kerala is connected with the Arab world from centuries, the Tamilians with Southeast Asia, the Northwest with Afghanistan. In fact, when I say Sapta Sindhu, two of the rivers, two of the tributaries are in Afghanistan. So, it's not as though it was all within South Asia. So, along with this, the increasing tendency to condemn something called a colonial mindset, which I've just referred to, is now being extended to the Mughals. The belittling is of a different kind, remember. It is to do with the kind of jealousy about architecture and craftsmanship, where all that the Mughals commissioned is attributed to Hindu rulers who had built them, and we don't quite know how they used them, but they had built them. The Jaipur Raja definitely built the Taj Mahal and then handed it over to Shah Jahan. So if people can start believing this, not be surprised if they believe that Savarkar rode on bulbuls to come back to India. What has to be addressed with honesty, professionalism and sobriety, now this is the important bit, is religion as practiced in India and the issue of mental and physical violence. An average day's newspaper today has a number of stories connected with both, sometimes connecting them both. History is being used to build up a retaliatory violence for imagined slights many years ago. Surely the student will want to know, for instance, and then they stop asking after some time, why a supremely courageous people like the Rajputs were defeated by so-called Muslim, instead of referring to them by region, invaders. The first you realize is referred to by Varna, the Rajputs, and the second, the Muslims, by religion. They do not ask this because it's taken for granted, and now it's a truism, as it were, that Muslim invaders were violent and etc. etc. You know the story. Now let us just see why this happens, and I'm ending with this. There are 5 questions a historian should ask. The students are only given answers to 3. The questions are when, who, where, why, and how. Let's take the obvious one. In 1192, Mahmud Ghori defeated Prithviraj Chauhan at Tarain. So you've got the date, that is when. You've got his name, which is who. And you've got Tarain, which is where. But we never answer how and why. It is assumed that a Muslim grows up to ride on a horse and attacks countries all around, and for some reason always wins those battles. Now, wouldn't the kids, particularly the boys, love to hear about warfare? They told nothing. They're not told about warfare on horseback, on camels, and what about Alexander and Porus and the elephants? You know, these are all exciting things to understand. There's so much news coverage of defense today. Why can't we extend that to the past? So, this reminds me of Peter Ustinov saying on 31st October 1984 that Gandhiji had to preach non-violence because Indians were a violent people. Think about that. It is true. I mean, if you look at history and you look at the tens of thousands that were killing off merrily, all exaggerated, I'm sure, but nonetheless, it shows an attitude of mind. So, if you introduce the reality, instead of making the past sound a lot of virtuous people who've somehow collapsed into rather sorry-looking characters, there's something completely misunderstood there. History has to come closer to lived experience. Otherwise, it will not matter whether the lesson is about microliths or about Chandragupta II or about the Bal Gangadhar Tilak. They're all in the past, and that's very far away. I'm trying to say that you should connect it with the present, not treat it as a foreign country. Thank you.